Good morning. Today is July the 6th, 2023. I wish to pay tribute to a man who had a great impact on my life, who passed away 50 years ago today, Dr. Joseph Martin Dawson. I never had the pleasure of meeting this man. This is his outstanding book, his autobiography, A Thousand Months to Remember. But I'm proud to say that I'm a graduate of the J.M. Dawson Studies in Church and State at Baylor. Dr. Dawson, like myself, was a Freemason as well as a graduate of Baylor, and a minister of the gospel. We had many things in common. It was from September 1973 to May of 76 I was enrolled in the J.M. Dawson Studies in Church and State at Baylor University in my hometown of Waco. Now, Dr. Dawson died on July 6th, 1973, at the age of 94. The 1973-74 school year was the first year he had not graced the Church State Research Center with his presence. But I was out of state at the time. During the summer of 1973, I sold Bibles for Southwestern Company of Nashville, Tennessee. I was in the beautiful Appalachian community of Pulaski, Virginia. And I got home in early September and enrolled in classes and had a graduate assistantship in church and state. But during that year, I learned a lot about this man who had affected the life of so many people. And I currently live in Corsicana, Texas, and pastor Bethel AME Church. And Dr. Dawson spent his last 10 years of his life in Corsicana. He was born June the 21st, 1879, near Maypearl in Ellis County, Texas. I was pastor of Brown Chapel AME Church in Maypearl from 1996 to 1999, so I know a little bit about that community. And it was on June the 3rd of 1908 that he married Willie Turner, with whom he had 5 children: Alice, Leighton, Joseph, Ralph, Matthew, and Donna. He made a public profession of saving faith in Jesus Christ at the age of 13. This was at Central Baptist Church in Italy, another Ellis County town. He attended Baylor University and he earned his Bachelor of Arts in 1904. And from what I understand, that was his only earned degree. He had a Doctor of Divinity conferred by Baylor in 1917, a Doctor of Letters from Howard Payne College in 1936, and a Doctor of Philosophy from Saints Peter and Paul Seminary in 1940. So he had 3 honorary doctorates. It's interesting that he never attended seminary, but he served on the board of trustees of both Southwestern Seminary in Fort Worth and Southern Baptist Seminary in Louisville. Outside of his 4 years at Baylor, much of his education was by experience and being self-taught. He wrote a number of books and accomplished more than a lot of people with more degrees than that. He pastored a number of churches, South Fork, Red Oak, Newcomb, and Hewitt, while a student at Baylor. He also pastored First Baptist Church of Lampasas from 1904 to 1906. I don't know what he did between 1906 and 1908, because it was 1908 he became first pastor of First Baptist Church of Hillsboro. He served 4 years there, then went to the First Baptist Church of Temple. He served there 3 years. Then in 1915, he was called to the First Baptist Church of Waco, and he stayed for 31 years. He was a prominent Baptist leader in Texas, all across the United States, and even worldwide. He was very much of a Baptist, but he was first and foremost a Christian, and a very ecumenical Christian at that. He held many influential positions within the denomination, including those of Vice President for the Baptist General Convention of Texas, Chairman of the Southern Baptist Convention Executive Committee, and he was among 4 Baptist representatives at the formation of the United Nations in 1945. On this occasion, he presented a petition bearing more than 100,000 signatures asking that a declaration of religious liberty be included in the United Nations Charter. He served as the first executive director of the Baptist Joint Committee on Public Affairs in Washington, D.C. I believe the current name of the organization is the Baptist Joint Committee on Religious Liberty. He was there from 1946 until his retirement in 1953. And it was in 1946 he helped establish the Texas Institute of Letters. He was later inducted as a member. Uh, for 30 years, he served as a trustee at Baylor, and he was also on the trustee board of University of Mary Hardin Baylor at Belton, Southwestern and Southern seminaries, and also Bishop College in Dallas, an African American school. Bishop College was founded at Marshall, later moved to Dallas, but it closed in bankruptcy in 1988. 2 years later, Paul Quinn College relocated from Waco to the former Bishop campus. And I taught at Paul Quinn for a number of years, first in Waco and later in Dallas. But Dr. Dawson was very committed to religious freedom and felt like religious freedom and separation of church and state went hand in hand. He wrote much on church-state issues, including books Separate Church and State Now, American Way in Church, State, and Society. And in 1957, Baylor recognized his labors in this field through the creation of the J.M. Dawson Studies in Church and State. After his death, Dr. James E. Wood Jr., founding editor of the Journal of Church and State and longtime director of Church-State Studies, wrote, "More than any other person this day, he influenced his own denomination toward a recommitment to religious liberty, the separation of church and state." By the way, James Wood, another Freemason, was cut from the same cloth as J.M. Dawson. Dr. Wood was the director of the first director of church-state studies at Baylor, and then he later became the executive director of the Baptist Joint Committee on Public Affairs. He was the second such director. He was the third such. Dr. Dawson was the first. The second was C. Emanuel Carlson. And I don't know much about him. And then Dr. Wood. I never actually had Dr. Wood I was never actually enrolled in one of his classes. I applied to the program and was eventually accepted when he was there, but then he moved on and he was succeeded by Dr. James Leo Garrett. I was the first person to start and complete the church-state program under Dr. Garrett. I met him in the fall of '73, and it was in '76 I completed my thesis, but we maintained our friendship until his death at the age of 94 in the year 2020, and I had the honor of being a pallbearer at Dr. Garrett's funeral. Now, but Dr. Garrett began preaching at First Baptist Church of Waco when Dr. Dawson was his pastor. And the I remember one time someone visiting the Church State Research Center asked Dr. Garrett if there was any chance he would become the next director of the Baptist Joint Committee, and he said no, there was no line of succession there because C. Emanuel Carlson, the second director, was from a totally different background with no Baylor connection at all. But anyway, Dr. Dawson wrote a great deal, both articles and books. And at the Baptist Joint Committee, he established and edited the report from the Capitol. He served on the editorial council of the Journal of Church and State. And he published many books. Spiritual Conquest of the Southwest was one of them. And his autobiography, A Thousand Months to Remember. His last book was Jose Antonio Navarro, co-creator of Texas. It was published when he was 90 years old. And he made a trip to San Antonio. He visited Casa Navarro, as I have, the home of Jose Antonio Navarro, the man for whom Navarro County was named. Now, Navarro was a Mexican leader who was opposed to the policies of Santa Anna. He was a good friend of Sam Houston and Stephen F. Austin and all those guys of that era. And he is there's no proof that he ever visited Navarro County, but the Dawson was ahead of his time when it came to civil rights. He regularly encountered other races, especially African Americans and Hispanics. And during that era, the term was Negro and Mexican. And he wrote about the issue, but one very vivid experience when he witnessed the horrible lynching of Jesse Washington in Waco in 1916. He was lynched in front of City Hall, and he spoke out against that. He spoke out boldly against the Ku Klux Klan, even though there were some Klansmen that were members of his church. And is one of the few Baptist preachers to have that much courage to speak out. And Dr. Garrett told me an interesting story that it was in 1950 that by then Dr. Dawson had left Waco and was serving in Washington, D.C. with the Baptist Joint Committee. There was a meeting in Cincinnati of the Baptist World Alliance, and Dr. Garrett was only 25 at the time, but he observed something he knew was quite significant. Dr. J. Newton Jenkins was a African American pastor of the historic New Hope Baptist Church in Waco. Started right after the Civil War for newly freed slaves. And Dr. Jenkins and Dr. Dawson had been good friends during both had long tenures at their respective congregations in Waco. They had not seen each other in several years. And keep in mind, this is 1950, 4 years before the Brown versus Board of Education decision. The civil rights movement had not got off the ground yet. This was very unusual. The two men walked up and embraced each other, which was nothing. You don't think about anything like that now. It's no big deal, but it was back then. And Dr. Garrett saw that as quite significant. And but Dr. Dawson retired from the Baptist Joint Committee in 1953, and then he remained in Washington for another year to do research in the Library of Congress for his books, Baptist in the American Republic. And one day he was taking a break from his research and was reading the newspaper. He came across a newspaper obituary of Dr. J. Frank Norris, the very controversial fundamentalist Baptist preacher in Fort Worth. Dawson and Norris were classmates at Baylor, but they were not friends. In fact, throughout his career, Dawson tried his best to leave Norris alone. Norris would not leave him alone. And it was really a strange feeling of melancholy that came across him when he read that obituary. His good friend Glenn Archer was the first executive director of Americans United for Separation of Church and State, an organization Dr. Dawson helped establish. And on one occasion in his autobiography, The Dream Lives On, Glenn Archer talks about his good friendship with Joe Dawson, and he said that Dawson called him once. He said, "Glenn, Dr. J. Frank Norris is dead. Dr. Norris wrote 1,000,000 words against me, but I've survived him." But in 1964, after he completed the research, he moved to Austin. He and his wife did. They had 2 daughters there, and he was assured there'd be plenty to do. There were plenty of churches in Austin, so there'd be plenty of opportunity for supply preaching. The University of Texas had an excellent library where he could go to do research for his continuous writings. And There was Highland Lakes not far from there, where he could indulge in his favorite hobby of fishing. And so they stayed there until 1960. They were there from 1954 to 1963. Then it was on April 18th, 1963, that Mrs. Dawson died. Dr. Dawson then moved to Corsicana, where I live now. His sons, Leighton Brooks Dawson and Ralph Matthew Dawson, Ralph Matthews, called Matt, they had a law partnership in Corsicana for many, many years. And they're both now deceased. Dr. Dawson lived to be 94. Leighton lived to be 91, and Matt lived to be 98. So there's got to be quite a bit of longevity in the Dawson family. And another school where I've taught is Navarro College, and Leighton Dawson, whom I met at a church state lecture at Baylor in 1994, he served 41 years on the Board of Trustees, and on the campus today they have a Dawson Auditorium named for him. And the younger brother, Matt, was taught for many years at Baylor Law School. I met him in 1987 at a program at Hill College, but in his autobiography, Dr. Dawson wrote, "For my remaining years, I'm located in the solid, beautiful city of Corsicana under the filial eyes of my two lawyer sons and their lovely families. I live in the Navarro Hotel, named for that great citizen of Mexico who sided with the Texas revolutionaries. The man for whom old Navarro County was named, the vast county out of which 15 north central Texas counties were later carved. It furnished the first Texas oil field and keeps contributing eminent people to state and nation." And in the book, by the way, he makes a passing mention of Collins Street Bakery in Corsicana, where the President of the United States, the Queen of England, and the Duchess of Monaco were noted over the years for buying fruitcake. Now, Dawson became a Freemason late in life. During his time in Washington, he reported who had never been a joiner, now accepted membership in a number of organizations, notably the Masons. He was initiated as entered apprentice on April 16, 1948, passed the degree of fellowcraft on February 1st, 1949, raised to the sublime degree of Master Mason on March 29, 1949, in National Lodge number 12. He received the 14th degree in Mythlos Lodge of Perfection, November 23, 1949, the 18th degree in Evangelist Chapter of Rose Croix in November 28, 1949, and the 30th degree in Robert D. Bruce Council of Kadosh, and the 32nd degree in Albert Pike Consistory on November 29, 1949, all in the Washington Scottish Rite bodies. The Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite Southern Jurisdiction conferred upon him the 32nd degree Knight Commander of the Court of Honor on October 20th, 1953, and the 33rd degree on December 23rd, 1953. He demitted from Washington and transferred his membership to the Austin Scottish Rite bodies on December 2nd, 1955. Freemasons have a long history of support for religious freedom and separation of church and state. I previously mentioned Glenn Archer, a Freemason who served as executive director of Americans United, talked about a incident on a snowy February day in 1948 when Sovereign Grand Commander John H. Cowles of the Scottish Rite Masons 23rd Southern Jurisdiction handed us a check which aided us in the budgetary needs for the first year. And Archer was instrumental in arranging Scottish Rite financial support for Dr. Dawson to attend the World Council of Churches First Assembly in Amsterdam, Netherlands, which began August 22, 1948. He later wrote it was money well spent. Dr. Dawson made quite a splash over there. He lobbied for a religious liberty plank in one of the WCC charters, made a speech on the floor, and came back with some rather good publicity. And on October 16, 1951, Americans United presented a bronze tablet to the Supreme Council in behalf of recognized Cal's long years of untiring work to maintain the principle of separation of church and state. And eventually, Baylor became a major recipient of Scottish Rite support. During the biennium of 1961, the Scottish Rite Foundation donated $10,000 to Baylor in support of innovative program J.M. Dawson Studies in Church and State. And one of the Scottish Rite's publications in its education program was entitled Church and State, was primarily a result of research and editorial work at Baylor. When the Baylor program was 10 years old in 1967, the Scottish Rite was acknowledged as a chief contributor, having given a total of $50,000 up to that point. By the spring of 1968, the program was sufficiently strong, promising enough to be elevated within the university to the status of a research center. As I stated, I enrolled in that program in fall of 73. In that 73-74 academic year, I was Dr. Garrett's graduate assistant, and I learned a great deal in his class in ecumenics and also his seminar on church-state relations, which was jointly taught with the late Dr. Robert T. Miller, who was also I had for constitutional law, a long-time eminent authority on political science. And Glenn Archer talked when he came to Texas on business. A stop in Corsicana was a must on his itinerary. He recalled his last stop at the Navarro Hotel. Is Dr. Dawson still living here, or has he moved to a senior citizens home? The idea of a senior citizens home jarred the clerk. Senior citizens home? He can outdo most young men. Why, today he's been to Waco and back to do a radio program. Justly rebuked, I said, please tell Dr. Dawson that he has friends who want to see him. So Glenn Archer and his wife, Ruth, took the elevator to the fourth floor, walked the corridor, and they heard this firm voice say, come on in. There on the sofa sat the man who had abruptly changed the well-planned course of my life. Glenn Archer he was a lawyer, he was a law school dean, and he had other things on the agenda, but he quit all that to take over Americans United as a result of Joe Dawson's persistence. Here he was, 92 years old, the Roger Williams of the 20th century. If anybody doesn't know, Roger Williams was he founded the state of Rhode Island, advocated complete separation of church and state in colonial America, also founder of the Providence Baptist Church, the first Baptist church in America. Just a very influential man. He maybe it'd be a subject of another video, but at that time, his surprise at seeing us was complete. He arose, put his slender arms around us, and shouted for joy. It was a glorious reunion, so full of questions and comments. I'm writing another book for the University of Texas. I did a 5,000-word radio tape today at Baylor University. And anyway, he said, I have a definite routine consisting of 3 activities. I fish daily for recreation. I write daily for mental stimulation. I sleep daily to renew my mind and body. As the elevator doors closed, there was in Dr. Dawson's eye a tear, in our hearts a glow of affection, a note of sad farewell, as we bade adieu to an unforgettable man, truly God's servant. His last public appearance was at our 1973 conference on church and state in St. Louis, where he delivered a remarkably lucid account of the early days with Americans United. He was a grand man, and my life has been enriched by our association. Dr. J.M. Dawson died in Corsicana on July 6, 1973. That was 50 years ago today. He's buried alongside his wife, Willie Turner Dawson, in Waco's Oakwood Cemetery. And I regret that I never got to meet him. Like I say, I just barely missed him. He died in Corsicana. I was out of state. I was in Virginia having a great summer. And I got back that fall and started the program named in his honor. I'm thankful I did have brief meetings with both Leighton and Matt, who had both long legal careers as well as other things they did. And by the way, Leighton was the oldest son. Matt was the youngest son. There was Joseph Turner Dawson was the middle son, but he was not a lawyer. He was a geologist and oil man who lived in Colorado. And he helped get the church state program started in 1957 with an $8,000 grant. So the family was very close knit, and they all seemed to accomplish a great deal, and they were very high achievers, and certainly that was true of this great patriarch, J.M. Dawson. He inspired me throughout the years. He was truly an outstanding Freemason and a great and good man. God bless Dr. Joseph Martin Dawson as we remember him on the 50th anniversary of his death. Have a great day.